Time to fight fear with faith. Jody Paar is a survivor who is no longer staying silent. She and her guest will fuel you up so you too can fight fear, uplifting and inspirational stories that will rock you to your core. We don't tiptoe around the truth. We steamroll it in a bold way. This is your life, and now is the time to start living it. Get ready for the Faith Over Fear podcast with Jody Paar. Now, welcome Jody Paar to inspire you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Faith Over Fear. I am Jody Paar. Welcome family. I'm so glad you're here. We have an amazing guest, an amazing story today. So I am not going to take a lot of time up. I just want to go ahead and get straight into it. My guest today is Laurie-Beth Robbins, and I have been watching her on Facebook, guys, and she is amazing. Anything from a chef to a speech coach to just her story is so powerful. There's a thousand things that this lady does, and it is absolutely awesome to watch her because her style is off the charts. I even bought the bling back today because I love her sequence outfits that she wears. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that so much. But I am so honored and excited to have you here today, Laurie-Beth. Thank you for being on Faith Over Fear podcast. It was really heavy on my heart to have you, and you're so busy and you have so many things going on that I was like, oh, she's not going to have time to jump on here. But you were so kind and you jumped right at the opportunity, and I appreciate you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much. You know, it's mutual appreciation, and I'm very honored to be here. I think it's so important when we do have connectivity and we do share our stories so that it may heal somebody else. And I believe that's why we're here. And if we do even a little bit of that repairing in the world, if we're part of the solution to make it a little bit better, then how grateful am I? So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to go right into it, Laurie, because on Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and a lot of you guys listening and watching know that I escaped human trafficking. That's what the poster is behind me. When I was 18, and I waited 23 years to even tell my story. But Laurie has a very similar story, very powerful, very chill bones. I don't know how to explain it. It's just super amazing how God rescued you. So if you would, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Laurie, tell us about this time in your life.
Certainly. And I do agree that somebody was clearly looking out for me. And it is one of these, as I say, and how lucky am I. And it's very similar in the sense that it takes a lot of survivors, years, decades, to speak about this, because there are unfathomable stigmas attached to this. And so I think it's very important when we do come forward to help breed almost a contagious sense of courage to other people, to other women particularly, to come forward sooner. Because of course, the sooner you do come forward, the sooner you heal. And you do. And so all of that PTSD and the tumult going through that is usually from stifling that in, which, you know, you certainly know well, and I too. And rarely does a divorcee, an American divorcee nearing 30, think that she could be trafficked and abroad with a bunch of Balkan bad boys, so to speak, in the underground fiefdoms of sex slavery and international human trafficking. But I answered an ad in a very predominant, well-respected publication to be an administrative assistant in Athens, Greece, when I was 27 years old. And I arrived, and when I got there was not a job, and my ego and young pride was not to just turn right around and tell friends and family that I went to Greece and came home in a day. And I was readily approached and convincingly coaxed by some other men who were not aligned, or so it seemed, with this defunct job. And they were in shipping. Just what or whom they were shipping, I did not so greenly know at that time. And they befriended me, and they brought me into their homes at the phenomenal Greek Easter with the whole spit roasted goats and lamb, the eyes and all, when in Athens, right? Do as they do. And I met the old yaya grandmothers, I met the babies, and I really, they built my trust seamlessly as I was groomed and loomed into a plan. And I think it's important, therefore, a lot of people now with the Taken movies, the series about trafficking, and the Quentin Tarantino Hostel 1 and 2 with similar themes, I think a lot of people feel that if their daughter goes abroad and isn't snatched immediately at the airport, then they're safe and they're fine. And usually those who are trafficked or in the throngs of these snares do know their attackers. And so this was the case where I had been befriended by them, and they had even encouraged me to call home on their cell phones and tell my parents in America that I was all right, because I didn't have a cell phone back then. And so I did, and I called home, and they really made a very concerted effort to make sure that there was trust built. And at one point even asking me to have my parents send more garments over because I would need more things instead of just living in hotels. And so my parents did send that. They built my trust. And then when a certain mogul was back in town and things were in place, they told me that now a job will exist and to be downstairs and ready for them. And I, being the tenacious person raised not to keep anyone waiting, so relieved to finally have a job. And this is where the naivete, one does not see it coming. This is not just someone, women are often sent in with very obfuscating methods to lure the girls in with more believability. Men pose as boyfriends, jobs are promised. There's all kinds of methods. And I think it's very important for people to understand that it's never as easy of what you think it is. And this was before all the Taken movies. This was when it was not so prevalent and not in every newscast. And so it was a very different concept and not something that I did see coming. And so a black Mercedes pulled up, screeching its brakes, driving right onto the sidewalk portion of the hotel where I was waiting. And I was aggressively put in that car and taken. And they were all there, Serbian, Albanian, Bulgarian, and Greek men. I knew the faces from the places where I had dined and been in homes. And so it went, except for one, the man who they were waiting for, and he was new. And I was driven to the airport in Athens, and I was put on a small plane, and I was flown to the north of Greece up near a border, where I was put into a seedy hotel. And two other men were brought in where negotiations went on. And in the morning I would watch while one of the men was changing a car license plate. He was cutting and pasting numbers on it and saying that this was because he had too many traffic tickets, you see, and that he needed to change this license plate before I would be driven across a border and my new job would officially commence. And so I will say, and of course, once these girls are taken across these borders, particularly in the Balkan countries, it is what is known infamously as the break-in period happens. And that's in the first 24 hours once the girls are trafficked, where upwards of 30 men are brought in round the clock to violently use and abuse the women and make it abundantly clear that they will never get out. And so, of course, they're disease-ridden and eroded and drugged and lugged across these borders. So before that, the traffickers, and only right before, first they're innocent, they build trust, they don't lay a hand on her, but right before she is sold, they do get their piece of the girl before she's all decayed. And I unfortunately was no exception to that part of their plan and was raped by the boss in Athens when a pit stop was made first. When they picked me up and took me to the airport in Athens, we first had to go stop at the boss, and I was raped orally by him, and then by the man in charge in the north, orally and vaginally there. But by the grace of God, somebody was looking out for me. And I really believe that it was in that moment that there was a very instinctive and yet innocuous surge of faith. And I took one hell of a risk after the rape in the north. And I took my little knapsack. I had a knapsack pocketbook, and I looked, and I had my passport, and I took a bottle of body moisturizer, of all things, out of my suitcases and put it in the bag. And I put that on my back, and I left my bags and a floor-length fur coat, my security blanket that I had. It was my talisman and my engulfing, the only materialistic thing I loved. And I had traveled to Greece in a snowstorm, and arrived to Greece with my fur coat, carried it around, and I left a fur coat and bags and took the knapsack, and I walked down the hotel stairs, and I turned and I looked and I ran. and I ran and I ran and I ran. And I approached strangers and eventually was taken to the American consulate, who did not help me. That was staffed with all foreigners. People say, if you're ever, go to these, that's another thing I think people really need to know and get educated. It's not like the movies. Liam Neeson will not arrive on cue. You have to save your own ass, so to speak. And I think we have to really become a little more self-reliant in the moments of anxiety, in the moments of fear, and really, what is it? God helps those that help themselves. And I think we have to trust and have that faith. And so I did. And in a very long and sordid, roundabout, also very frightening way, I did get home. And I'm still here. But it was quite a moment or leap of faith, as one might say, to trust taking that risk. And perhaps in that moment, I figured, what do I have to lose? And so I went. So I'm lucky. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't eat gallantly and raise that big goblet of gratitude with vino and hug people like I mean it. Now with COVID, people aren't hugging, but I used to hug every person I meet. I'm out hugging the garbage man. I'm hugging the mail lady. I'm inviting them in for food. I love life, and I am very survivor cognizant of life. And my biggest wish to women is for them to know their worthiness while they're here, to love their God-given figure, to eat the food, to not do this nut job on themselves, because it all could be taken away from them in a heartbeat. And I just hope they do understand that they are enough. They're more than enough. They're very worthy, and not to let that derail them from a wonderful life while they're here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said in that. Absolutely. Because a lot of these traffickers, they go after those who are insecure. They go after those who their families may not have been there for them. And as you said, it's all about that trust. And they're going to build that. And they're going to make you think that that's the person you've always wanted in your life, to make you feel comfortable, to make you feel security, to make you feel safe. And all of that is part of the plan to get you, to take you, and to sell you, just like you said. Your story is so powerful, Laurie. Whenever you were on the run, was there the fear that they were following you, that they knew where you were? I mean, because there was several different men in this situation that knew about you. So was that fear in you during that time?
It was very frightening for me, because when I even exited that seedy hotel and I ended up running to a much nicer hotel, I ran and ran and ran, and in 4-inch strappy sandals, no less, and a non-athlete. But I did run to it, what appeared to be, to the best of my sight, a better hotel. And when I exited the first one, I didn't know if someone would be outside changing that car license plate. I didn't know, but I could only imagine that if I was stopped by them, even coming down the stairs, that it would have been beyond horrible. But that's why I say somebody was looking on what must have been the luckiest day of my life. And I really do view it that way. A lot of people who are skeptical of God, perhaps, have said to me, where was God in that ordeal for you? Where was God in that? And I say, oh, God was clearly there. I'm still here.
Exactly.
Where was God? It was, where was man? And so I think we must remember this. And when I was talking to the consulate, one of the reasons, they were all terrified, and I would learn about all of the kickbacks of coin that first responders, border control, hoteliers, policemen who would assist in the dragging of girls back or in raping them too. Very corrupt. We were talking, we're also talking about almost 2 decades ago, with a very different time financially, and what was happening in the world right before the European Union, right before all kinds of changes. And there really was a lot of ilk and a lot of murk and tumult. And it was not, when you look at the ethos of what Athens was like then and what the north of Greece was like then. So even the consulate workers, who were all foreigners, they weren't Americans, and they seemed very afraid of these underground mafias, and they explained that a lot of them are from neighboring countries and they're not just Greek, so they didn't want to be involved. And I think that a lot of people were reticent to be involved anyway, just from the fear. So there was that fear that Are they following me? And I didn't know who to approach in a foreign country, not speaking fluently of the language. You know, who do you run up to? And therefore my trek home was tumultuous as well, with more people who wanted me for sex and other things. And so you're trusting, you're going in different places. And I had turned 28 while in Greece. This was over the course of a few months. They groomed and so forth. And so as a 28-year-old woman, I did not feel like calling up my parents and scaring them out of their minds. And you also, as you know, you come out of something like that so shell-shocked, so confused, and so in denial. Talk about taking decades to talk about it. You don't even know what just happened, and you can't even fit, and you don't want that story. So you try to say, well, maybe he did have too many traffic tickets, or maybe they really were going to give me a job. You're trying to even process what just happened and tell yourself, you know, something else. And one thing that I do think saved my life in the moment of it not being worse was I drew upon my sexuality in the moments of rape and acquiesced for fear that in the name of self-preservation, if you will. And somehow there again, I say somebody far higher than my ego was looking out for me, because I instinctively did not try to say no and fight and scream. And I thank God in hindsight that I didn't do that, or it would have been a very gruesome, far worse. I can't even fathom what could have happened. But for years, there was shame, there was confusion, there was even a little survivor's guilt. I had met a girl who was being trafficked also. They are very careful over there not to let any of the girls mix, you know, so that there will not be any hope built and also any escape route. And so early on with the transactions, they're very careful about that. But I did meet one woman, and years later, when I would speak to my parents more about it, it would take me a long time to find the words and find it within myself to speak to anybody, really. And it always came out a little convoluted early on. I would say, yeah, I went to Greece. I had this thing. I had a thing. Yeah. And I look at that now. Now I can laugh about it. I say, what kind of did you have? It's like, that sounds like it, you know, a thing. But, you know, you really are so reticent to even say the word rape, to even say trafficking, and there's shame and some survivor's guilt. So I remember speaking to my father years later, and I mentioned this girl who I had told him about, and for anonymity, I'll just call her Jenny. And that wasn't her name. And I said, well, I wonder what happened to Jenny, who I met. And my father said, she's dead now. All right, you've got to know that. And so it's just a horrific. I always say that in our country now, it's very prevalent in the news with trafficking, but so many people have almost that, I think, earthquake in India mentality, where they see it on the news, you see, but they also, it is so removed from them. And they do not believe that this can happen to their children or in their family. And as you articulated so astutely moments ago, it's not about income. It's not even about age, as it was in my case. It's not just young children. Right. It's all about and only about vulnerability. And there's not a soul on this planet who has at one point or another not arrived somewhere as the perfect storm, being vulnerable. So that is what they prey on. And I think that it's very important to raise awareness and education so that these people understand that if their darlings do go abroad on a spring break or whatever it is, and if, God forbid, they are taken by these repugnant vermin who are so meticulously good at what they do, that you do not see it coming, particularly on foreign land. And it is such a violent cesspool of what happens there in these diabolical snares that the girls will not live through that, even the break-in period alone. But I think it's important that they understand Liam Neeson will not arrive on cue. It isn't the movies. And so it behooves them to understand that we all are vulnerable and we all need to be more educated about it. And so that's part of my crusade and modus operandi in sharing it. As you know, it's not a fun story, and it's not a story I adore. It's not a sexy cocktail party conversation, I'll tell you that. But it's an important one if it helps build awareness and possibly save another human life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what God told me, because I was like, this story is buried, it's blocked. You know, I don't want to talk about it. Just like you, right after, you know, when I was on the run, so to say, I never told anybody. I never told a soul what had happened to me. I tried to block it and even think it was a nightmare and that it didn't even really happen. You know, your mind will play tricks on you. Oh, that didn't happen to you. You imagined that, you know? But it was when God was like, this is not about you. This is about you telling your story so you can help others. And Laurie-Beth, I have to tell you, when you have suicidal people come to you that are hiding stories that are like, they needed to hear that so they could give their, you know, problems and what they were going through or their secrets to God, because you can't carry it on your own. It's not something that you can carry on your own. That is a healing that, I'm sorry, I tried to self-medicate for a long time. It doesn't work, you know? And so even listening to your story and everything that you went through, you know, only 5% of us even make it that have been through those tremendous things and the trauma that we've been through. So I admire you so much because of your beauty, because of how you talk to others and always show love. You always show love. And I'm a hugger too. And this has been really hard.
I know.
It's difficult because you want to protect others. But it's like, you know, that love that pours through you that you can see, where I'm pretty sure you went through what I went through, which was years of anger and hate and being mad. Did you go through that?
I always say I was on the last bastion of humanity to understand forgiveness. I had a very hard time. It took me into my late 40s. I'm 50 now, just to put it into perspective. It really took me a long time. And people would say, you don't forgive to say that what they did is right. You do it for you. And I was a quick enough study to get that. And I was bright enough to understand it. And I said, yeah, I get that, but no, it still is not enough. And I had a very hard time. So there was a little survivor's guilt. There was shame, which is a vicious animal. There was the stigma of being judged and coming forward. Will people say you're trying to elicit attention and sympathy? Will people say you made it up, that you've never even been to Greece, that you're a crackpot or you're crazy? Will the men come back? Will other men ever love you and want to hold you? Will they think you're dirty and used goods? Will you, all kinds of things churning. But I had a very hard time with forgiveness. And then finally, through faith, I really did realize that forgive for the sake that you no longer are attached to that anger component of it. And so it was being attached to that. It's that you don't want to have anything to do with these people. You don't want to be attached to the anger. And, you know, of course, Churchill said that if you're going through hell, keep going. And Marcus Luttrell, Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell of Lone Survivor, book and film fame, said that the only way out of hell is to walk right through it. And I do think that we can take a sage page out of the unwavering candor of the late great former British Prime Minister, and also the unflappable bravery of the frogman, so to speak, and understand that it isn't just march right through it when you escape. It's that aftermath of marching right through that hell, because as they say, surviving the surviving is where it's really far harder than what happened in a short moment of time. What happens in a short moment of time, as you know, is almost like a movie in that it's moving. But the years and tears afterward, where you're struggling with anger, shame, confusion, stigmas, and all of it, and then for me, the forgiveness component is where you have to really, I think, summon from your heart, soul, and might, and the depths, and really march through hell then, and realize it's not going to go away. I think a lot of us think, well, maybe if I tell myself it was a better story, that I went over there and I met some nice people, or, you know, when I went over, I wanted to meet a Greek god, you know, and instead, you know, so you try to tell yourself all these things, but if you march right through it in the healing process, if you can talk to people sooner, if you can get it out, if you write about it. I did try to write a book or a screenplay, but it wasn't honest in the grit. I didn't want it to be as yucky as it was. And I was trying very hard to rewrite that story. And now I realize you can't. You can't erase the past, but you can say, what about now? And what do we do now? And now we must share in the name of helping other people. I think we have an obligation to help other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that 100%. So after you got back to the States and you're just trying to survive, I mean, you're trying to get back to some kind of normal life. Tell me when the love of like food and cooking, and was that like a healing thing for you? That, because you're amazing. Like if you guys are just wanting to be hungry all the time, follow her on Facebook. Because let me tell you, these entrees that she makes, number one, they're always healthy. Number two, they're always beautiful. They're always presented in such a amazing way. And so tell me, like, how did that come about?
Well, thank you very much. It is a passion, my magnificent obsession, exotic, healthful cuisine paired with wine. The wine is not, I don't ever meet someone for drinks. Wine is part of the meal. So they go together. I don't have food without wine, and I don't have wine without food. So it's all part of it. But I came out of the womb really with this. It's funny, when my mom was pregnant with me, she was going to be induced after false labor. And she said to my father, if this girl is finally going to come into the world, I want a righteous steak dinner before I go get induced. And he took her to have a steak dinner. And she even had red wine then. I know today she wouldn't want to admit that when pregnant, but she had wine and she had her steak, and she had just finished scraping her porterhouse to the bone when she was whisked away from a white linen tablecloth to a white-walled hospital room, and I would soon emerge hungry and thirsty at that. But the powerful seed of suggestion was planted, and at the age of 6, I asked my parents, in rural Vermont no less, for octopus and frog legs to eat. And they had, my sister was older, and she certainly had never asked for those things. They certainly didn't eat those things. We were not in a cultural mecca of a town where that was available. And our little black and white television with 2 channels wasn't showing any of that. My friends didn't eat it. We have no idea to this day, the jury is still out on where that came from. But to my parents' credit, they really did try to foster that curiosity and palate, and they drove out of state trying to find whatever octopus or any exotic thing for their little gourmand child. And as I would go through school, I would barter with my parents to be taken to gourmet restaurants in reward for winning speech tournaments. And so this was how it, so to come back from Greece, food was already, it was such a passion for me. And I always associated, unlike a lot of women, with the hideous and insidious body hate that I think is so tragic, and fearing the food. I had a very irreverent mother who taught me at a young age to love the food, and she encouraged my interest in it. And I was allowed to have a little wine at the table when I was even 10 with dinner, a smaller glass than what I have now, I'll tell you that. But they encouraged this. And I always associated food with worthiness. And so I felt, if you deem yourself worth it, you get to eat, and you get to have all of this stuff that kings and queens have. And I thought it was worthy. So when I came back from Greece, it was very important to me that I at least would uphold my standards of beautiful food and not do that to my body, not diet and say I don't deserve. I wanted to feel any modicum of worthiness that I could. And I think that and my wonderful parents, I always say I chose my parents well, but I really, if not for that, I don't think I would still be here amid that healing, surviving the surviving, and all the shame and all the ilk. It really, as you know, that is one roller coaster, and we repeat what we don't repair, as the saying goes. Mm-hmm. And so we draw in another cast of characters that keep us in that unworthy feeling until we heal that, and until we really get that worthiness back in check. And that took years. It really took years, but the food was an integral part of that. And no matter what was happening in my heart or my head, there would be one time a day where corks were popping and the table was set and music was on and aromatic aromas and everything wafted through, and life sure was good again. And so every day when I have my main meal, I eat once a day, and I eat some 4,000 calories practically, but once a day, and then fast until the next day. That's my rhythm, but it's not what is right for everybody. But every day when I have that moment and I raise my wine and I really savor it, phones are off, and it's just a reminder of worthiness and that life is a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Well, this time went by so fast, and
It did.
I figured it would, because I was so excited to have you on here. What would be something that you would say to maybe someone listening who has been through something very traumatic and they're pretty much giving up on life and they don't want to continue on? What is just a quick word of wisdom and of faith and of power that you would speak to somebody?
I would tell them that they survived for a reason, and they were spared for a reason, and a pretty powerful one. And we have all of the resources inside if we understand that that there's a powerful reason. We are worthy, we are enough, we should eat the food, we should love ourselves. But try to dig deeply down, away from the externals, away from social media and everything that can be bombarding us with negativity, and try to discover what is that reason, and make that the focus rather than the shame and the blame. And if I had done that earlier, oh, what a happier chick I would have been over the years. But we are here for a reason, and particularly those who nearly lost their lives with a survivor story. You weren't spared by accident. God doesn't get it wrong, and that's my most overused expression, albeit the one I believe in the most intrinsically too. So I think people really need to remember that, even and especially in the darker moments. There's a powerful reason, and so it behooves us to find it. Yeah.
So beautiful. You are such a blessing. You really are.
Today the pleasure was absolutely mine. This was a treat. You're a gift, and you're doing God's work, and it is one of these. So thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
You are so welcome. It was my honor. It was my honor. And guys, thank you so much for watching. We're going to put all the links below, how you can watch Laurie, how you can follow her, keep up with her. I'm sure she would be open to if you wanted to discuss or talk to her. Also, my name is Jody Paar, Jodypaar, guys. Please make sure that you go and rate this podcast as you listen to it. Those stars are so important in order for people to get to see these podcasts, because I really feel like in my heart that it is an impact that it can make on somebody that just is in a place of not knowing what to do or the next step to go in their lives, feeling hopeless, and knowing that there is hope and that there are people that have been through traumatic things in their life, but God always has a plan for you. And just like Laurie said, if you're still here, there is so much purpose in your life, and I just want to speak that into you today. So thanks again, Laurie, for being on here. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.